The phone rang at 6:15 in the morning, and my brother's voice came through flat as a dial tone. "Dad died last night," Todd said. Then, before I could even breathe, he added 4 more words. "You get nothing." Behind him, I heard Priya laugh. My father was standing 3 feet away from me at my kitchen sink, tightening the packing nut on my dripping faucet with a butter knife, because the man has never once traveled without a toolkit in his head. He didn't flinch. He set the wrench down slow. He leaned toward the phone until his voice would carry, and he said something. 4 words. Todd didn't hear them that morning. You will. You'll hear them exactly where he finally said them out loud, in front of 60 people who thought they'd come to bury him. Because here's what nobody on that call knew yet. The memorial they were already dividing his estate over was happening in 3 days. And my father had picked out the flowers himself. My name is Megan Holloway. I'm 34 years old. Welcome back. This is where quiet people finally get loud, with dignity. We tell stories about family, betrayal, and justice that actually lands. If you've ever been underestimated at your own kitchen table, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. And subscribe, because you don't want to miss how this one ends. 9 months before that call, my biggest worry was a reserve schedule. I fly first officer for a regional airline out of Charlotte. Short-haul routes, 3 time zones a week, a roller bag that never fully unpacks. My father thought that was hilarious. "You fly a metal tube full of strangers," he'd say, "and you can't find 20 minutes to fix my porch light." That was Walter Holloway, 76 years old that fall. Army, 1968 to 1970. He came home, apprenticed as an electrician, and opened Holloway Electric on Route 12 in Millers Creek, Tennessee, in 1979. He ran it for 39 years, sold it in 2018, and retired into the same house he and my mother bought the year I was born. He wasn't wealthy. He was paid off wealthy. The kind that doesn't show up in a man's truck. It shows up later, in a courthouse. My mother, Joanne, died almost 2 years earlier. My father grieved the way he used to run a job site. Quietly, on schedule, without asking anyone to watch. Every evening at 6, he turned on her kitchen radio, tuned to the gospel station she always kept it on, because Joanne used to say a silent house was a house giving up. He cooked his own dinners. He still drove his old truck to the hardware store on Saturdays, mostly so people would ask after him. He called me every Sunday, and I called him back. We were fine. Everyone was fine. I need you to sit with that for a second because it matters later. Nothing about that fall looked like a warning. My father was sharp, stubborn, fully capable of running his own life, right down to the wiring in his own walls. He'd tell you himself, if you asked, that he didn't need looking after. And for 76 years, he was right. It's exactly what made it so easy for 2 people to convince an entire town that he wasn't. Then came February, and one patch of ice he didn't see on his own porch steps. He was carrying the recycling bins out at 6 in the morning, same as every Tuesday for 40 years, when his foot went out from under him. He broke his hip. He broke his right wrist bracing the fall, the same hand he'd used to wire half the buildings in that town. Surgery for both. A rod in the hip, a plate in the wrist, and a walker for 6 to 8 weeks after. Not a tragedy, an inconvenience with a titanium price tag. I flew in inside a day. When I got to the hospital, Todd and Priya were already there, and Priya was working the orthopedic surgeon like he was a client she was closing. Full name, full eye contact, a business card practically materializing out of her blazer before the man had even sat down. At the nurse's station, I noticed my own cell number had been quietly replaced on his intake sheet. Priya's now, listed as primary contact. I didn't think much of it. I should have. "You get some rest," Priya told me, squeezing my arm by the elevator. "That's just what family does for family. We've got this covered." At the time, it sounded like relief. It took me months to hear what it actually was. A woman quietly assigning herself the keys. I still asked the right questions before I left, because I always do. Discharge plan, medication list, follow-up schedule. Priya smiled and said it was all handled, all set up. Don't you worry about a thing. My father, doped up and grinning with his good hand, gave me a thumbs up from the bed. Go on, kiddo. I'm in good hands here. So I flew back to Charlotte and picked my rotation back up. I need you to understand that part, because it matters later. I didn't leave because I didn't care. I left because the two people standing closest to him kept telling me it was handled. One of them had already decided exactly how handled it was about to get. Dad moved in with Todd and Priya that week. Just until he's off the walker, they said. 15 minutes from his own front door. Priya offered to hold on to his house keys too, just so nothing got lost in the move. It sounded like tidiness. It was the first door she ever actually closed. Packing his overnight bag, we needed his insurance card, so we went out to the garage and pulled his old steel lockbox down off a shelf. I'd never seen inside it before. His union apprenticeship card from 1968. The ink pressed so deep it had nearly cut through the paper. The original deed to the house. An envelope in my mother's handwriting he didn't open in front of me. Some things, he said, latching it shut again, you keep closer than a bank. He set it under his workbench like it was nothing. I didn't know yet how much that box was going to matter. A notary came to the house that same week. With his wrist in a cast, Dad couldn't sign checks or drive to the bank. So he signed a narrow power of attorney, left-handed, in his cramped, careful printing. Bill pay and doctor's appointments only. I want you to hear me clearly on this part. That document was legal, reasonable, and boring. Your own father would have signed one. Mine did. That's exactly what makes this kind of thing work. It never starts as a crime. It starts as a favor. Priya posted a photo that week. Dad at her kitchen table, soup in front of him. Blessed to care for my father-in-law. Family is everything. 200 likes by lunch. On a Sunday call, Todd mentioned Dad's house on Larkspur Lane, the one he'd paid off in his 40s, and called it the equity, easy as talking about the weather. Sorry, he said when I caught it. Sales brain, force of habit. Then the wall went up, one polite brick at a time. Week 1, my Sunday call landed on Priya. He's resting, hun. Week 2, the same thing, a little more clipped. By week 3, I called at a different hour just to catch him off guard, and I still got Priya, first ring, like she'd been sitting on the phone. He's in the shower. I'll tell him you called. His old flip phone broke, so I overnighted him a smartphone, set it up myself, loaded my number in first thing. Delivered, the tracking said. It never got to him, Priya told me. So strange. No idea what happened to it. I asked which doctor was following his hip so I could just call the office myself, get the recovery timeline from someone with a license. Priya said she'd have to check and get back to me. She never did. I asked once, straight out, if I could just talk to him for 2 minutes. Why are you being like this, Meg? She said. Like I was the one being unreasonable. Here's the thing nobody tells you about a situation like ours. I fly a plane full of people for a living. I make fast, exact decisions under pressure for a paycheck. And I still couldn't get a straight answer out of my own brother about my own father, because the two people standing between us kept smiling every time I asked. I couldn't have told you what was wrong yet, not in words. I just felt it the way you feel a stall coming before the instruments even confirm it. That low hum telling you the numbers on the panel don't match what your body already knows. Memorial Day, I flew in for the cookout. Dad's lawn chair had migrated to the edge of the yard, past the grill he used to run himself, almost to the fence line, like furniture nobody remembered moving. A neighbor called over, "How's Walter settling in?" Priya answered before he could open his mouth. "He's doing so much better, aren't you, Walter?" He just nodded and drank his decaf. "Doctor's orders," Priya said, when I asked. No doctor of his had ever said any such thing. I got him alone on the back steps for 10 minutes. both of us pretending we needed air. My checkbook's on a diet, kiddo, he told me. Statements went paperless months ago. The password's live with Priya now. I asked to see them twice. Both times Todd just laughed and said, "That's what you've got us for." I went back inside and asked, as calm as I could manage, if we could all sit down soon and go over Dad's finances together. All of us. No big deal. Todd answered before Priya even opened her mouth. "We don't need outsiders in a family matter, Meg." Notice the move. I'd asked about bank statements. He'd handed me back the word outsiders. Priya started crying right on cue about how nobody appreciates the one who actually stayed. And my father, because he is decent, and decent men make the softest hostages, patted my hand under the table and told me not to start a war over hot dogs. I flew back to Charlotte that night with a knot in my stomach I didn't have a name for yet. I do now. By midsummer, the calls had shrunk to under 2 minutes. He's resting. He's napping. I started keeping a log without admitting to myself why I needed one. I pulled 2 weeks of leave. Reserve pilots don't get much notice, and bluing schedulers don't love last-minute swaps, but I didn't ask twice. I didn't call ahead either. I wanted to see what an ordinary Tuesday actually looked like at Todd and Priya's house, instead of what got described to me on a Sunday. The flight down felt longer than the actual flight time. Part of me was still hoping I'd get there and feel foolish for coming. Priya opened the door surprised, and only surprised for about 2 seconds. Then the smooth voice clicked back on, like flipping a switch. "Dad was up at a buddy's lake place," she said, helping fix a roof. My father had been off the walker 4 months. He still favored the hip-on stairs. I stood in that doorway doing math that didn't add up and said nothing, because I didn't have proof yet. Just a bad feeling. And bad feelings don't fly airplanes. Facts do. I drove past the old house on my way out of the neighborhood, half expecting a truck in the driveway I didn't recognize and half expecting nothing at all. It was the second one. Blinds drawn. Mail wedged so tight in the box it curled out the slot. Grass gone shaggy in a way my father would never have allowed even from a hospital bed. A house that paid off, that loved, doesn't look abandoned by accident. It looks abandoned because someone decided it should. I stopped at the hardware store on Main for a phone charger, mostly just to have somewhere to stand and think, and ran into Roy Callahan, Dad's oldest friend. 40 years of Tuesday coffee at the Legion Hall between them. The kind of friendship that doesn't need a phone call to check in. Roy's face did something complicated when I asked casually if he'd seen Dad lately. He hadn't. Not at coffee, not at the hall, going on 3 months now. He said it careful, like he'd been chewing on it a while and hadn't known who to tell. "Nobody's seen him fixing anybody's roof, Megan. Nobody's seen him, period." I called Priya from the parking lot before I'd even started the truck. Different story this time. Dad was resting at a cousin's now. Low energy. Doctor's orders to stay quiet. 2 lies in 1 afternoon, and they didn't match each other any better than they matched the truth. I sat in that parking lot a long time, not crying, recalculating. 3 weeks after the hardware store, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. Barb Nguyen, a friend of Mom's from church, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, working PRN now as an aide at a place called Golden Oaks. She wasn't calling to catch up. She sounded rattled, like she'd talked herself into the call and back out of it a few times before actually dialing, and had finally decided a stranger's discomfort mattered less than whatever she'd been watching all week. She said a resident on her floor had been asking every aide, on every shift, for weeks, whether any of them knew a woman named Megan. Described her exactly. Tall, flies planes, his daughter. She said it like a man who'd been told his daughter didn't want to hear from him, and had quietly decided not to believe it. I'd spent months being handed a story that read fine on paper. Resting, recovering, a lake house, a phone that kept breaking. Every explanation technically possible, Nothing technically provable. That's the thing about a bad instrument reading at altitude. You can keep trusting the gauge because it's the one everyone else is looking at, or you can trust what your gut is telling you the plane is actually doing. For the first time since February, I stopped trusting their gauge and started trusting mine. I didn't call Todd. I didn't call Priya. I've replayed that decision since, and I still don't fully know what made me skip past both of them without a word. Except that some part of me had already stopped expecting the truth from either one, and calling first would have just given them time to build a better answer. I got my keys. I didn't pack a bag, didn't leave a note, didn't do a single one of the reasonable things a person does before driving 2 hours toward an answer she isn't sure she wants. I got in the car and pulled out of the driveway before I could talk myself back into being careful about it. 2 hours down a state highway I'd never had reason to drive, past exits with names I didn't recognize, past a stretch of nothing but pine and billboards for lawyers, to a building with half its sign lit, golden oaks, the rest gone dark who knows how long ago. Nobody had bothered to fix it. Nobody had bothered to notice, probably. I sat in the parking lot for a full minute before I went in, the way you sit on the ramp before a flight you already have a bad feeling about. Then I walked in the way I walk a pre-flight walk around. Slow. Looking for what shouldn't be there, and for what should be there and isn't. A call light blinked over a doorway with nobody moving toward it. A med cart sat locked in the middle of the hallway at 1 in the afternoon, unattended. 2 staff working a floor that needed 6, both moving fast in that specific way people move when they're perpetually behind and have made peace with it. None of it said neglect in big letters. All of it said neglect in the small ones, which is worse, because the small ones are the kind everyone can talk themselves out of noticing. One shift at a time, until noticing them at all, feels like an overreaction. Somewhere behind the front desk, a chime went off overhead. Soft, two-tone. The kind of sound you stop hearing after your first week working anywhere. I didn't think anything of it right then. I had bigger things pulling at my attention than a hallway noise. I'd think about it a lot later, though, because months from now I'd go back through my own memory of Priya's calls. He's resting, he's napping, he's fine, Megan, stop asking. And somewhere underneath one of them, so faint I'd written it off as a television left on in another room, I would remember that exact two-tone chime. Stay with me on that one. It's going to matter more than either of them knew it would. Right then, though, I wasn't building a case. I was walking a hallway on a stranger's directions to a room number, my heart doing something closer to a stall warning than a heartbeat. About to find out if my father was even in the building at all. He was in a shared room at the end of the East Hall. Second bed. By a window that didn't open. Thinner than I'd ever seen him. Maybe 15 pounds down. Gray stubble he never would have let out of the house. A shirt on him that wasn't his. But when that door opened, his eyes came up sharp. Whole. Present. Been wondering when you'd show up, he said. They told me you already knew where they'd put me. That sentence did more damage than tears would have. They hadn't just hidden him from me. They'd hidden me from him, and told each of us the other one had signed off on it. We spent the better part of an hour untangling 9 weeks of careful lying, and every thread led back to the same 2 sets of fingerprints. The lake trip that never happened. My phone that never made it to him. Priya told him it got lost in the move, and that a new one wasn't in the budget, not with all his care costs. He didn't even know I'd tried to send one. He'd been here since June. A couple weeks of rehab, they told him. Insurance would cover it, just to build his strength back up before he went home. The couple weeks kept not ending. There's nothing wrong with my mind, he told me, low enough that only I could hear it. So I tested him myself, because I needed to see it firsthand and not just take his word for it. I had him walk me through wiring a 3-way switch, step by step, the way he'd taught apprentices for 40 years. He didn't miss a single connection, sharp as the day he retired. Then he leaned in close and said the thing that turned my worry into something colder. Whatever paper got me admitted here, kiddo, I never put my name on it. Not once. I walked up to the front office with my professional voice on, the one I use when a gate agent tells me a flight's fine to push back and my instruments say otherwise. The administrator was a heavy-set man with a tie the color of weak coffee, and he ran the script he'd clearly run 100 times before. Only the responsible party could authorize a discharge, and the responsible party on file was a Mrs. Priya Holloway, who held power of attorney. I asked one question. Does Mr. Holloway have any diagnosis of cognitive impairment on file? Dementia, incapacity, anything at all? There wasn't one, because there wasn't one to have. You can't hold a mentally competent adult somewhere against his will just because it's convenient for someone else. He can discharge himself. Full stop. I said it evenly, and when the man's mouth kept opening and closing without anything useful coming out of it, I mentioned the long-term care ombudsman's office and offered to call them together and go through the intake file page by page. I had the whole afternoon free. Mentioning the ombudsman's office by name did more in 5 minutes than the entire previous hour of asking nicely had. 20 minutes later, my father sat at that same desk and signed his own discharge. Right hand steady, fully healed. The letters coming out clean and sure. First form I've signed all year that nobody talked me into, he said, loud enough for the room. Somebody get the truck. We're leaving. I set him up on my pull-out couch in Charlotte, refilled his blood pressure prescriptions, and made a pot of real coffee. Doctor's orders be damned. Then we walked into a bank branch together, because Walter Holloway was still the account holder of record, and an account holder is entitled to see exactly where his own money went. The teller printed out 6 months of statements, thicker than either of us expected. He read them the way he used to read a job that had gone wrong. Slow, twice through, no cursing, both hands flat on the counter like he needed something solid to hold on to. $224,000 had left his account since February. $58,000 of it labeled care expenses, for a man eating off a tray at a facility that billed a fraction of that. $110,000 wired to something called PH Capital Group. You can guess whose initials those are. $46,000 more went toward paying down a credit line that traced straight back to Todd and Priya's own name. About $10,000 was left, out of a nest egg he'd spent 39 years building one job site at a time. He didn't say much. He just tapped the PH Capital line twice with one finger, like he was checking a connection for current. Stapled behind the statements, a courtesy copy of something worse. A reverse mortgage application on the Larkspur Lane house. $175,000. One signature away from closing. We hired a woman whose entire job is paperwork. Nancy Reeves, elder law, 30 years in, an office that smelled like coffee and toner, reading glasses on a chain, a handshake like a filing cabinet clicking shut. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting once, and when we finished, she said the only thing that mattered. I don't need you angry. I need you organized. Fall apart on your own time if you have to, not on mine. She moved fast, and every move was completely legal. First, a notarized revocation of every power of attorney my father had ever signed, filed with the bank and the county recorder that same afternoon, so nothing new could be built on the old paper. Second, a dispute letter to the reverse mortgage lender, which froze that application dead in its tracks. No money had moved yet, which meant the house was still clean. Third, a fraud affidavit with the bank and a report to Adult Protective Services, both of which start clocks that even a smooth talker can't quietly stop once they've begun ticking. Then she laid out the actual problem. Civil recovery she could get us, probably within a year or two, quietly, in a courtroom nobody would ever hear about. Criminal intent was harder. Todd and Priya would say he authorized everything verbally, that it was a loan between family, that grief makes people forgetful about small details. Men like that always have a version ready before you ask the question. For real charges, she said, it helps enormously if they use a forged document again, somewhere public, somewhere witnessed. A lie in a drawer is a lawsuit. A lie performed out loud for an audience is a conviction. We drove out to Larkspur Lane on a Tuesday, when Todd would be at work and Priya would be at her office downtown. My key still worked. Some oversights are gifts. The air inside was stale in a way that felt like an insult. The drawers in Dad's den hung open, picked through. My mother's jewelry box sat empty on the dresser. His workbench in the garage had been rifled through too. Tools left out of their outlines on the pegboard he'd painted 40 years ago, so nothing was ever hard to find. Nobody had touched the radio in the kitchen in months, and the silence in that house had a weight to it I hadn't expected. Dad stood in the middle of his own living room like a man visiting a museum of his own life. Then he went to the garage and pulled the steel lockbox down. Still locked. Still exactly where we'd left it back in February. He carried it to the kitchen table, the same table every real decision in our family has ever been made at, and set it down next to a copy of the escalated power of attorney Nancy had pulled from the bank's file, the one granting full financial authority, the one he never signed. He laid his 1968 union card beside it, 2 signatures, 58 years apart. His real one dug in deep, the H in Holloway leaning hard, like a man walking into wind. The one on the forged document was round, even, polite. Prettier than I ever write, he said, tapping it. And I wasn't even hurt yet. I want you to notice what hurt him instead. Not the theft. The insult of a signature that didn't even bother to look like him. But the handwriting wasn't the part that broke it open. The date was. That power of attorney claimed he'd signed it in person at a bank 40 miles from Golden Oaks on a Tuesday in July. Golden Oaks' own sign-out log, which we'd already requested along with his discharge paperwork, showed he never left the building that entire week. A man cannot be in 2 places at once. That single date had just testified against the people who'd forged it. Nancy laid out what she thought was really happening. Todd and Priya needed my father either incapacitated or gone to close this out clean. A contested guardianship fight would buy them exactly that kind of time. Slow, public, and murky enough to let a frozen reverse mortgage quietly thaw while everyone argued. We can hand all of this to the police Monday, I said. Clean, quiet. No stage. It was my old habit talking, the one that thinks every disaster in every room is mine alone to prevent. My father was quiet a long while. When he answered, it wasn't sharp. It was almost gentle. They didn't just take my savings, kiddo. Savings can be rebuilt. I built mine once with a wrench and nothing else. They took my say. Told the whole town I needed storing. Told my own daughter I didn't want her around. A man's word is the last thing he actually owns at 76, and I want it back, in front of every single person they lied to get it. I stopped arguing. Some part of me had known he was right since the moment that door opened at Golden Oaks, and his eyes came up sharp instead of confused. This was never only about the money. It was about a man who'd spent his whole life being the one other people relied on, watching 2 people decide, quietly, that his own word no longer counted for anything. So we built something else instead. No fake death certificate, no government paperwork, no false report to any agency, ever. Just one phone call, friend to friend, and a memorial his own Post brothers would throw for him, the way they've done for each other for 60 years. Roy didn't ask a single question before he said yes. 50-some years of friendship earns a man that much. He'd make the call to Todd himself, he said, and he'd make it sound exactly the way it needed to sound. Barb agreed that if anyone from the family phoned Golden Oaks asking after him, she'd only ever say what was true. As far as this facility's concerned, Mr. Holloway checked out weeks ago, which happened to be true. Nancy would come to the memorial as a guest, nothing more. Briefcase on her knees, in case certain documents happened to get waved around in public. Fooling a fraud isn't against the law, my father said. I had Nancy confirm it twice, just to be sure. Roy made the call Wednesday evening from his own back porch, with Dad and me close enough to hear every word through a speaker only Roy could see. My father sat still, arms crossed, watching that phone the way he'd watch a breaker panel he didn't trust yet. Roy's voice carried the practiced calm of a man who's delivered hard news his whole adult life. "Todd," he said, "it's Roy Callahan. I've got some difficult news about your father." A pause followed. 3 seconds, maybe 4. Long enough for Priya's voice to cut in close behind Todd's, quick and businesslike. "Who's got access to the accounts right now? Is somebody handling that?" "Not is he in pain." "Not, oh my God, not Dad." My father's hand tightened once around his coffee cup, then let go. Roy never missed a beat. The Post would host a small memorial Saturday, he said, the way they do for all their own, no cost to the family. As for anything else, well, he supposed some lawyer somewhere had whatever paperwork there was. He left it right there and let them decide what to do with it. By 9 the next morning, Priya had a tribute photo up on her page. "Gone too soon. So blessed to have loved him." Sympathy poured in from half the women at my mother's old church. By Saturday, before the memorial had even started, a locksmith's van sat parked outside the house on Larkspur Lane. Sam Kessler, a neighbor who'd watched that street for 30 years, called me confused. "Somebody's changing your daddy's locks, honey, before he's even in the ground." We learned the rest later, from phone records. 26 minutes after that call ended, Todd dialed the reverse mortgage lender's office and left a message asking about closing timelines. Some people's grief, it turns out, still keeps business hours. Saturday, 2 o'clock, the Legion Post Hall. 70 folding chairs set out on a floor worn pale down the middle from decades of boots. Flags at the front of the room. A photograph of my father in his dress uniform from 1969, young in it, grinning like the world hadn't caught up to him yet. He'd picked the flowers himself. White carnations, because they were what he brought my mother on their very first date. And some things a person doesn't get to fake. The whole town turned out. Post brothers in their caps. Neighbors from Larkspur Lane. Women from my mother's old church circle setting out foil-covered dishes in the kitchen for afterward. Barb slipped in near the back door. Nancy sat off to one side, her briefcase held on her lap the way you'd hold something you already know you're about to need. Dad and I waited in a storage room behind the stage, watching through a gap where the door didn't quite meet the frame. My job was to stand in the dark and keep my breathing steady. His job was easier. He'd already done the hard part. Todd and Priya took the front row, and Priya had brought a folder of her own, tucked against her side like she couldn't wait to open it. At 2 o'clock, Roy stepped up to the little podium and said the line we'd built this whole plan around. "Before we get to remembering Walter the way he deserves," he said, "the family's asked for a few minutes first, on some practical matters." They'd requested that themselves, that same morning. Nobody had to talk them into it. Priya took the podium like she'd been saving herself a seat there for weeks. She opened the folder. Cream paper, a blue backing, a document with real weight in her hands. "Walter had a will drawn up this past July," she told the room, pitching her voice to Carrie. "Everything, the house, the accounts, the truck, goes to Todd and me. His daughter Megan receives nothing from this estate, on account of her own choices." 70 folding chairs shifted at once, a sound like the whole room changing its mind about something. Half the people in that hall had listened to my father brag about his daughter, the pilot, for 30 years running, and the math in front of them didn't add up to the man they'd always known. This was it. My final approach. The one landing that actually mattered. And every page in that folder Nancy carried was about to be the black box that outlived whatever story they'd told this room. The side door opened. My father walked into his own memorial in his good dark suit, unhurried. Because Walter Holloway has never once hurried for anybody, and he wasn't about to start at his own funeral. The room came apart at half speed. A dish hit the floor somewhere, and nobody bothered turning to look at it. A man near the back let out one sharp laugh before he could catch it. Barb had both hands pressed over her mouth. Priya went the color of the carnations, two dark lines starting down her face before she'd even registered she was crying. Dad walked to the podium, adjusted the microphone down with two fingers the way he used to fine-tune a switch panel, and found Priya's eyes across the room. "That's just what family does for family, isn't it?" he said, mild as Sunday morning. Funny how that phrase never once made it into a courtroom. Nancy stood, buttoned her jacket, and carried her folder to the front table, laying it out piece by piece in a flat, patient voice. The kind you'd use reading minutes from a meeting nobody wanted to remember. A signature comparison. And here my father reached into his own breast pocket and set his 1968 union card down beside the forged power of attorney, so the whole room could see both signatures without needing anyone's word for it. A facility sign-out log placing him at Golden Oaks on the exact date he'd supposedly been signing papers 40 miles away. Wire transfers to a company carrying his daughter-in-law's own initials. A reverse mortgage application that should never have existed at all. And this will, Nancy said, dated this past July, while Mr. Holloway was a resident at a facility that logged not one single visitor that entire month. So, tell the room. Who actually witnessed you sign it? There were two names on that witness line. One belonged to a man sitting in the fourth row with a casserole dish balanced on his knees, a colleague from Priya's own office who'd come to pay his respects and had no idea his own name was sitting on that page. That was when the hall doors opened, and two deputies came up the center aisle, moving the way people move when they already know how the next 10 minutes are going to go. "Mrs. Holloway," the older one said, "we need a statement from you regarding some financial documents that don't check out. You'll need to come with us." I watched every version of herself Priya owned rise up and fail, one right after another, faster than I could keep count of them. Outrage first. This is a family matter, a misunderstanding. Then charm, aimed at the deputies like a closing pitch. When neither landed, something underneath both of them I'd never once seen on her face before. Real fear. In front of 70 people who would all remember exactly how it looked on her. I looked at my brother, the one who used to let me win at checkers on purpose when we were kids, and I gave him the calmest sentence I had left in me. "You called me before sunrise to tell me I'd get nothing, Todd. Turns out I'm the only one walking out of this hall with everything I walked in with." Around us, the hall was already emptying out in that careful, unhurried way a small town empties a room when nobody quite knows where to look. Nobody rushed for the door. Nobody wanted to miss whatever came next either. The deputies led Priya out through the side door, still explaining herself the whole way. Todd wasn't arrested that day, but two more deputies stayed behind to take his statement, and his version of events kept shifting a little every time he told it. Roy found me by the coat rack afterward, still buttoned into his good jacket. "Best service I ever ran," he said, "and I sincerely hope I never have to run another one like it." My father caught up with Todd out in the gravel lot before he reached his car. He didn't raise his voice. He hardly ever does, not even when it's owed. He just said one thing, quiet, meant for Todd alone. "Should have made sure I couldn't sign my own name anymore before you started spending what wasn't yours, son." Todd didn't have an answer for that. I don't think there is one. The days after that blurred into paperwork of a different kind, the kind that actually holds. Priya was charged with 2 counts of forgery, exploitation of an elderly adult, and fraud tied to the reverse mortgage application. The state suspended her financial advisor license within the month and revoked it entirely by winter. In her field, that's not a slap on the wrist. That's the end of the whole career. PH Capital Group got dissolved by a court-appointed receiver before the year was out. Between the bank's fraud recovery and the receiver's clawback, my father got back $165 of the $224,000 they took. The reverse mortgage never closed. The house stayed his, moved into a trust Priya couldn't touch even if she still had a license to touch anything with. Todd took a plea. Probation, a restitution schedule stretched out over years, and community service hours the judge assigned, with what I have to assume was a very dry sense of humor. At a senior living facility 2 towns over. He stocks the linen closet and runs the Tuesday bingo hour, in a building where half the residents haven't had a visitor in months either. People ask if I've forgiven my brother. I'll tell you what I told him. Over coffee neither of us really drank. At a diner exactly halfway between his side of the county and mine. I didn't come to gloat. I came to hand him an envelope. A copy of our mother's letter, the one from the lockbox, with 1 new line added underneath it in my father's handwriting. Make it right first. Everything after that is still yours to build. It wasn't forgiveness. It was terms, laid out plainly, with room for him to meet them or not. Restitution paid in full, real accountability, real distance from whatever he'd let himself become. Until then, he gets exactly what he offered me at 6:15 that morning. My father's back at the Legion Post every Thursday. He and Roy started something out of it that's turned into a small local habit. A monthly sit-down they call Check Your Own Wiring. Free coffee, a folding table, 2 old men teaching people their age how to read a power of attorney and spot a signature that's trying too hard to look sincere. It started small, just a handful of folks the first week. These days, the room's too small for it. I took a permanent line out of Charlotte instead of reserve. No more 3 time zones a week. Every Sunday, I still make the drive, and Dad still burns the cornbread a little on purpose, because he swears I like the edges that way. The lockbox doesn't stay locked anymore. It sits open on the mantel now, where the silence used to be the only thing living in that house. His union card, my mother's letter, the deed, and tucked in right beside them, a dog-eared flyer for a Thursday night talk at the Legion Hall. I fly for a living. People assume the hard part is the landing, that one exact second the wheels touch down. It isn't. The hard part, the part that actually matters, is staying the one flying the plane the whole way down, instead of quietly handing the controls to somebody who only sounds like they know where the runway is. If this made you think about your own parents' paperwork, hit subscribe, and tell me in the comments, if you'd been the one standing in that kitchen at 6:15 in the morning, would you have called a lawyer first, or built the trap? Thank you for sitting with this one all the way through. I'll see you in the next story. Todd broke where Priya couldn't. He dropped into his chair like whatever had been holding him up gave out all at once. We were drowning, he said, to nobody in particular, and everybody at once. The condo, the cards, all of it. It was only ever supposed to be temporary. Then, in the very next breath, because some men reach for the nearest hand to blame before they'll reach for their own. You made this worse, Meg. If you'd just left it alone, none of it had to come out like this. I looked at my brother, the one who used to let me win at checkers on purpose when we were kids, and I gave him the calmest sentence I had left in me. You called me before sunrise to tell me I'd get nothing, Todd. Turns out I'm the only one walking out of this hall with everything I walked in with. Around us, the hall was already emptying out in that careful, unhurried way. A small town empties a room when nobody quite knows where to look. Nobody rushed for the door. Nobody wanted to miss whatever came next either. The deputies led Priya out through the side door, still explaining herself the whole way. Todd wasn't arrested that day, but 2 more deputies stayed behind to take his statement, and his version of events kept shifting a little every time he told it. Roy found me by the coat rack afterward, still buttoned into his good jacket. "Best service I ever ran," he said, "and I sincerely hope I never have to run another one like it." My father caught up with Todd out in the gravel lot before he reached his car. He didn't raise his voice. He hardly ever does, not even when it's owed. He just said one thing, quiet, meant for Todd alone. "Should have made sure I couldn't sign my own name anymore before you started spending what wasn't yours, son." Todd didn't have an answer for that. I don't think there is one. The days after that blurred into paperwork of a different kind, the kind that actually holds. Priya was charged with 2 counts of forgery, exploitation of an elderly adult, and fraud tied to the reverse mortgage application. The state suspended her financial advisor license within the month and revoked it entirely by winter. In her field, that's not a slap on the wrist. That's the end of the whole career. PH Capital Group got dissolved by a court-appointed receiver before the year was out. Between the bank's fraud recovery and the receiver's clawback, my father got back $165 of the $224,000 they took. The reverse mortgage never closed. The house stayed his, moved into a trust Priya couldn't touch even if she still had a license to touch anything with. Todd took a plea. Probation, a restitution schedule stretched out over years, and community service hours the judge assigned, with what I have to assume was a very dry sense of humor, at a senior living facility 2 towns over. He stocks the linen closet and runs the Tuesday bingo hour, in a building where half the residents haven't had a visitor in months either. People ask if I've forgiven my brother. I'll tell you what I told him, over coffee neither of us really drank, at a diner exactly halfway between his side of the county and mine. I didn't come to gloat. I came to hand him an envelope. A copy of our mother's letter, the one from the lockbox, with 1 new line added underneath it in my father's handwriting. "Make it right first. Everything after that is still yours to build." It wasn't forgiveness. It was terms, laid out plainly, with room for him to meet them or not. Restitution paid in full, real accountability, real distance from whatever he'd let himself become. Until then, he gets exactly what he offered me at 6:15 that morning. My father's back at the Legion post every Thursday. He and Roy started something out of it that's turned into a small local habit, a monthly sit-down they call Check Your Own Wiring. Free coffee, a folding table, 2 old men teaching people their age how to read a power of attorney and spot a signature that's trying too hard to look sincere. It started small, just a handful of folks the first week. These days, the room's too small for it. I took a permanent line out of Charlotte instead of reserve. No more 3 time zones a week. Every Sunday, I still make the drive, and Dad still burns the cornbread a little on purpose, because he swears I like the edges that way. The lockbox doesn't stay locked anymore. It sits open on the mantel now, where the silence used to be the only thing living in that house. His union card, my mother's letter, the deed, and tucked in right beside them, a dog-eared flyer for a Thursday night talk at the Legion Hall. I fly for a living. People assume the hard part is the landing, that one exact second the wheels touch down. It isn't. The hard part, the part that actually matters, is staying the one flying the plane the whole way down, instead of quietly handing the controls to somebody who only sounds like they know where the runway is. If this made you think about your own parents' paperwork, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments, if you'd been the one standing in that kitchen at 6:15 in the morning, would you have called a lawyer first or built the trap? Thank you for sitting with this one all the way through. I'll see you in the next story.